Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, Opie's journey from foster care to a hasty marriage at 18, born out of an unplanned pregnancy during college. The couple faced marital challenges, worsened by the lack of communication and intimacy issues. When infidelity came to light, the narrator filed for divorce, obtaining custody of their children to shield them from the foster care system. Now let's get into the story. I was in the foster care system until I got married when I turned 18. I was living with foster parents that I lived with for about a year and a half. Around that time, I started taking courses in community college. That's where I met my wife, Julie. She was charming and bright when she spoke to me. She stood out against any girl I'd ever met, and I was immediately smitten. We had sneaky, unprotected intimate for a year and a half while attending college together until she became pregnant with our first child. We were kind of forced to get married faster than I would have liked to. We were really young and simply did not have the guidance I wish we had. Our elders were all Christian and extremely traditional, so the wedding was pretty much planned for us. We attended mandatory marriage counseling before we got married, but we were never asked any deep or real personal questions. It was mostly focused on what the Bible said about marriage, not about how we were feeling or thinking about all this. I was still in love with Julie, so we went through with the marriage and had our daughter. When my wife fell pregnant a second time, our baby was just 4 months old. After we had 2 babies, we needed a large income as quickly as possible. Due to my foster care background and lack of stability, I found it impossible to stick to a job for longer than a year. It was like torture to try focusing on any task for most of the day, for most of the year, and for most of my life. I never had to commit to anything this long. And speaking of that, our intimate life was starting to dull already. I guess I took out my frustrations on my wife sometimes without realizing it, and I eventually started looking for other people to talk to. Using my phone, my wife discovered this, which led to the following disaster. My foster parents were informed of my behavior, including late nights out, that they offered Julie a little getaway at their house while I stayed with the babies. They took her out to eat and stayed up late to watch movies and play games. It was good, innocent fun until I found out otherwise. One day after my wife returned from her getaway, my foster mother took me out to lunch and told me some disconcerting news. Apparently, after she went to bed, Julie came on to my dad while they were watching a movie. After my wife came back home, my dad crumbled at my mom's feet and told her they had intimate. He begged her forgiveness. She didn't know how she was going to handle it, but knew she needed to tell me immediately because I deserved to know. I stayed out of the house for a long time while I processed this. When I returned home, my wife already knew that I was informed of her infidelity. She was a wreck. It looked like she had been crying for a while. She begged me to start over with her. She understood she fucked up, but it was because she didn't feel like we had any connection or communication anymore. I stayed with my foster parents while deciding what to do. Julie had the children while I was away, and it helped me clear my head. I stayed away for 5 weeks to really let my wife lay in the bed she made. She called me every day to talk about how I was feeling and what I needed from her. She video called for me to see the babies. She said she missed me terribly and prayed every day that I'd come back to her. I guess her prayers worked because we started attending counseling and seeing psychologists. It worked for some time, but eventually, we started failing each other again. She mentioned that she felt guilt every day and that she would never be able to make up for the pain she caused me. I finally filed for divorce and took the babies with me to my foster parents' house. They were thrilled to get to know the children better and had nothing but time and money to spend doting over them. My wife hated this, but I was determined to keep my children out of the foster care system, and I was going to remain their father. She was miserable and I couldn't trust her to communicate with me or keep me in their lives. She fought tooth and nail in court to win full custody of our children, but since she was accused of infidelity and didn't have a place to live or any income, I was awarded custody. She went on to have more than a few children with other men and never found any stability. The lesson I learned was not to have unprotected intimate and never get married quickly. She still pays me child support and only sees the children a few times a year. I certainly wish the efforts and lessons we learned would have been enough to repair our relationship. You have quite the tale. Today's second story. In this story, OP was married and got divorced a few years ago. They found love with a friend and embarked on a new journey, with one partner making a career change. The career change was challenging, and the other partner financially supported them. The couple got engaged and seemed happy until he discovered their partner was having an affair with a coworker. They confronted their partner, who admitted to it but downplayed its significance. Despite the revelation, the couple continued with their engagement party and family gatherings. Now let's get into the story. I was married and got divorced a few years ago. I found love with a friend I have known for years, who I confided in, who I can only see myself with. She had been in failed relationships, and together we began a new journey with our motto, and so together they built a life they loved. Together we decided that I, who had been in a dead-end job, would resign to embark on a new career. I have gone through specific training, going through a pretty arduous training process. This thing has been lengthy with little income. She has been incredibly gracious in keeping the ship afloat, and especially in the last 6 months has carried us both eyeing the finish line. By the end of the year, I have been eager to get the required licensing and build my book of business so that we could start to do all the things we had discussed. Big picture dreams, side note, incredible intimate life. More laughing than I've ever experienced. I asked her to marry me months ago and she happily accepted. And we were really riding on a high. The lack of income had taken its toll. I had begun feeling very inadequate, wishing I could provide, give her a sense of security, etc. On multiple occasions, she had expressed feelings that she didn't feel secure and that she often felt alone during the process. I'll admit I have felt like a shell of myself. I grew up instilled with a hard work ethic and have confidently assured her that this chapter will be but a blip on our shared journey. I have my faults. I know that I have not been the romantic I was prior to embarking on this career change. I also realized the immense pressure and stress this has put on her emotionally, mentally, and especially financially. So this brings us to last Wednesday, September 28th. She went to an industry event, a yearly thing hosted by an industry leader. I knew who she went with. Her company is small, consisting of the owner, a friend, and a neighbor up the street, her assistant, female, and a few technicians. One particular employee, who I refer to as Jake, has often flirted, who is married but is apparently divorcing. Also due to infidelity on her part. My spouse often spoke of the guy as a good worker, but that he had maintained a puppy love with her. I had shaken the guy's hand. He knew who I was. I had voiced my concerns about his flirting, and I had felt secure in knowing nothing was there. Her boss was out of town, so she went to the event with her assistant and Jake. He was their sales manager and made $100,000 a year. She told me it wouldn't be a late night. She arrived at 5:30 and she thought she would head home at 8-ish. 9:30 rolled around, and at that point, I was winding down. It was a weeknight after all. We both permanently share our location. My training often had me going out of town, so the location sharing was just a means for us both in case something happened. I saw she had left the venue and was nearby and in a public place. She was an adult. I didn't need to know everything, but I sent a text just to see how is it going up there? She replied it's a great night and that she would be home soon. She came home and she was on cloud 9, saying the night with the vendors went well and she was proud of how she represented her company. We went to bed with no issues. The next day, though, I noticed a marked difference in her, especially when she arrived back home from work. There was tension. I asked, "Is everything okay?" She replied yes, but I could tell she was lying. Friday I had the day off because we were heading out of town to attend an engagement party for us thrown by a family member of hers. Members of my family were coming down. I got a text afterward that she was running to pick up an order from Walmart for items for the party. My mind at that point had been racing, starting when she arrived home from that event. It in an instance outside of my character. I opened her new MacBook and immediately went to her messages. That's when I saw it. She had met up with Jake. There was clearly something going on. I went back and continued reading further back for weeks. It was there. Flirting escalating in nature. My hands were shaking. There were texts after their meetup in the Walmart parking lot discussing a kiss and her enjoying the feeling of being in his arms. I knew she was on her way home. I was shaking. I purposefully left the MacBook open while it was in my home office. It was there. I was outside composing myself when my watch notified me of her arrival through a Ring camera in her driveway. I waited a minute. She was in the house. Upon entering, it was clear she had walked through the front office and had discovered my discovery. She was cold. Without asking, she said, "Yes, it's real. It's happening." The next 30 to 45 minutes were a blur. I was shattered. She was stoic. She brought up the last 6 months and that it was nearly a crush. But there were feelings discussed. She said that it was nothing, but I know what I saw. She was defensive, though, and to her credit, I invaded her MacBook on my hunch. She said she was going to that evening. It was the night prior to our engagement party where both families would be in attendance. She was my person. I immediately made the decision that I chose her and she replied with the same. We even had our party. We even had intimacy over the weekend. Over the weekend we had small. And she was even vocally regretful. Monday rolled around and we were back to reality. She was back at work. She stated that she needed to keep the status quo because they were a small company and the guy's efforts were needed at that stage in the company's existence. Since Friday's revelation, there were only 3 people that knew. This is already so long. It's late Thursday, and I am broken. I have tried to maintain my cool. She says she loves me, she wants me, that I am her person. She's also very quick to want to move on. I feel like I am approaching a breaking point. Today's third story. In this story, after a fire in their apartment complex, the narrator's wife began an affair with a firefighter named Edward, who had saved her life. She concealed her marital status and they exchanged intimate messages. The affair became physical, and when it was exposed, the narrator gave his wife an ultimatum. She couldn't choose between them, so he chose divorce. She moved in with Edward, became pregnant, and was later dumped. Homeless, she asked to return, but he refused. Now let's get into the story. For months after my wife and I celebrated our 10-year wedding anniversary, there was a fire in our apartment complex. I was at work when it started, and apparently, my wife was sleeping until it became an emergency situation for her. She told me the smoke was fogging up the apartment really badly. By the time she woke up, she was conscious for a few minutes, attempting to breathe in fresh air from the vents or by cracking window. The next thing she remembers is a firefighter carrying her to safety as she was being treated by the ambulance. He stayed by her side, taking off his helmet and staring into her eyes as he spoke to her. She was a beautiful woman, so it didn't surprise me that she received extra attention from the man that saved her. The part one did have a problem with was that their contact continued after this day. While she was in the hospital, the firefighter gave her his phone number. We'll call him Edward for this recount of events. Before she was even discharged, she got WhatsApp on her phone and started texting him with updates about her health or even what she was up to each day. By reading the messages, you could tell he was smitten. She never mentioned being married, and I'm disappointed to say that it was only a matter of days before she started referring to him as her savior, expressing that she trusted him to protect her and sending him nudes. While I was at work, she invited him over to where we were staying while the apartment building was repaired. We were staying with a traditional Catholic couple that would not support her affair, so she took care to plan his visits when no one would be home for hours. My wife didn't return to work after the fire because she had trouble breathing for a while after the accident. It was the perfect storm to end my marriage. I know my wife only developed feelings for Edward because he saved her from that fire. It was a near-death experience, and people can change after those. On the day she was caught, I returned from work to find a shocking scene unfolding. The Catholic couple had just returned home from work to discover my wife and Edward making love on their living room couch. Talk about embarrassing and traumatizing for everyone involved. I started to shake as I approached, all 4 of them arguing on the front lawn. The Catholic wife was yelling at Edward within inches from his face, asking if he had any morals at all or if he had any idea what was going on. He mostly shook his head, just wanting to get out of there. He quietly admitted he had no idea she was married and was under the impression that he was welcome to stop by for visits with her. I told him to leave, knowing my wife would have to be the one to explain herself. That's when the four of us sat in the living room to talk and my wife broke down. She admitted she had feelings for him and chose to start the affair. I started bawling. Of course, I didn't see any of this happening to us, especially not after our happy 10-year anniversary celebration. I told her she would have to choose between me or Edward. She said she couldn't choose. That was the last straw for me, so I chose for her. The next morning, I grabbed her phone while she was sleeping and went out. I was able to read through all the incriminating WhatsApp messages with the lawyer. Through this, we discovered that their emotional affair became physical as soon as my wife was discharged from the hospital. That was about 3.5 months that I was unknowingly sharing my wife. So I talked everything over with my lawyer and proceeded to kick her out for the time being while I got ready for the divorce. She then moved in with Edward. During that time, she was outcast from the community we grew to be a part of over the past 10 years. It didn't seem to matter to her, and she became pregnant with their baby in just 3 months. After 9 months of them being together, he dumped her. Rumors I heard were that the baby wasn't his and she had cheated on him with someone else. While 6 months pregnant, she searched for a place to stay or live, but to no avail. Eventually, she swallowed her pride and asked me to take her back. That notion made me laugh out loud. After I denied her, she had no choice but to stay in a shelter for women. I sold our apartment for more than expected and got used to the new single life. All of this was really hard to go through, but I do want people to know that life carries on anyway. I think the biggest lesson for me in all of this is to never take anything for granted, but also to never expect or demand anything. I go through life longing for nothing but greatly receiving what's given to me. Sometimes my ex still reaches out to me and I'll respond to her, but it's mostly out of pity. She updates me on her situation periodically, and each time it seems like our qualities of life get farther and farther apart. I know she'll never reach the level of maturity I've had to reach after handling the emotional pain she dealt me.